citizens realize that on the issue of jobs in our economy, Republicans, Democrats, and independents have to work together. We can't afford to fight with one another.
That's certainly what voters want to hear, what the unemployed want to hear, what people underwater on their homes want to hear. The question is, what is John McCAIN and the rest of the Arizona delegation doing about it? Before we get to that question, I want to give you a viewer question from Peggy Hasty in Star Valley. That's up near Payson. She sent this to me via Facebook, and here's what she asks. The rural economy in Arizona is still deteriorating. 2 lumber yards in the Payson area closed, along with several other businesses. Mandatory furloughs for police and fire in the town of Payson. What is he doing to improve the situation for his district? I get this. I'm sure you get it. What are you doing specifically to help folks like Peggy?
I say, Peggy, that I'm going to be up in Payson here in the next couple of days, on Saturday, and I hope she'll come to the town hall meeting that I'm having up there. That's a good way for me to hear from her and the other residents. Look, I have town hall meetings all over the state. People are hurting, as I told you, terribly. There's 2 answers, major challenges that we face that we need to address, which we haven't. One is home ownership. We need to go out and buy up people's mortgage and give them back a mortgage that they can afford. The banks have obviously not done that. The commercial banks are in trouble here in Arizona and across this country, while the Wall Street institutions are doing great. That is an outrage. We also need...
So buy up all the mortgages.
Not all. People who cannot afford the payments that they have, and give them back a mortgage at a level they can afford.
So you've been a deficit hawk. That sounds like a deficit buster.
Actually, we did this during the Great Depression, and we ended up making money because people stayed in their homes, made their payments, and over time, the federal government got the money back plus interest. But that's far better than people throwing the keys in the living floor and walking out because they obviously cannot afford to stay in their homes. And despite all the rhetoric from the administration, despite all the rhetoric from the Secretary of the Treasury and others, we've not done that. In fact, I run into people all the time who are losing lines of credit, who cannot get their mortgage renegotiated and are having to leave their homes. The second problem, obviously, is jobs. Small business is a generator of jobs in America. Small business is what's been hurting the most. We need to give them the kind of tax incentives, the kind of lines of credit that they need through the Small Business Administration and other means so that they can stay in business. Look, I was in line in Starbucks the other day in Flagstaff. A guy came up to me and said, I've been in business for 15 years. I just lost my line of credit. The bank called and said because they've got to build up their reserves. Now, there was nothing wrong with his credit. He hadn't been behind any of his payments. So we have to make sure that small businesses have the wherewithal to stay in business and hire people.
But what about those people right now? 300,000 have lost their jobs in Arizona. Yes. They're running out of benefits, which Congress needs to act on. They're running out of their
Those
COBRA.
will be extended.
You will vote to extend the benefits?
Of course.
And the COBRA subsidy that they've had?
All those will be extended. But all that is a Band-Aid.
That seems to be what we need right now, just to get people to the other side.
We've continued to do that, Graham. But what we need to do is not have those people depend on these extensions. We need to get them into business, in the business of hiring. We took care of Wall Street. Nobody took care of Main Street. And the other thing we've got to do is make sure that never again, ever, is any institution too big to fail, and the taxpayers have to bail them out. So what we said was that Goldman Sachs and Bank of America, Goldman Sachs and Morgan and these people were too big to fail, yet the people on Main Street were too small to save. That's why people are mad. That's why the Tea Party people are out there.
And so isn't the stimulus plan in part kind of a little, creating a soft landing for some folks?
Not if you believe that, unless you believe that 9.7% unemployment is acceptable. A year ago, the president said, and his economic advisors, if you pass this stimulus package, unemployment will be at a maximum of 8%. Obviously, that's not the case. Now, of course, there have been some jobs created. If you throw $1 trillion at anything, you're going to create some jobs. But because it's been done with pork barreling, a terrible way of doing it, we're now laid an additional $1 trillion debt on our children and our grandchildren.
Speaking of the stimulus, though, what we don't often hear talk about is where would Arizona be, the state of Arizona be, without that money?
Well, we had an alternative proposal. Republicans did. In fact, I proposed it when we had the president's stimulus package.
But Arizona's receiving almost $2 billion.
I'll tell you where Arizona would have been if we'd have passed our proposal, which was $400 billion, by the way. Small businesses would be back in business. Small businesses would have had tax cuts. Small businesses would be hiring, and we wouldn't have been bailing out Wall Street and all of these incredible earmarked projects which don't create jobs. Now, again, some jobs have been created, but in return for that, we have committed generational theft, and we've laid a debt on future generations of Americans that is atrocious.
And speaking of that, I'd like to deal with this quickly if we can. I know it's a big topic, Medicare. Yeah. You talk a little about pork barrel spending. That is actually a pretty small percentage of the deficit.
Not
it seems
really.
like
not really. It's corruption. It's not only a small portion, but it's corruption.
It is, and that's acknowledged. But as far as tackling the deficit,
in all due respect, it becomes part of the budget. So when you increase with a pork barrel project, that becomes part of the expanded budget for the next year. So it does have a huge effect, and it is corruption, and it is what has led to spending being completely out of control.
Granted, but it seems
why in the world would we say, well, it's only several billions of dollars, so it's okay?
But the big bubble somewhere. The big bubble is Medicare.
The big bubble.
And nobody's taking that on.
My friend, the big bubble is Medicare and Social Security. Both of them are going to grow.
And nobody's taking that on.
You're exactly right. How do you expect us to ask the American people to help us with Medicare and with Social Security when the discretionary spending last year went up by some 20%? By some 20%. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars. And the waste and this mismanagement, if we went out and into Medicare right now and went after fraud and waste and mismanagement, save $100 billion.
And we got to leave it right there. Moving on now to our final block. Coming up, more with Senator McCain on the new family business, politics.